Hey guys, so today I want to talk about how to set goals that are going to help you actually build the business that you want, not necessarily the one that you have, that can really transform the business that you currently have today into that one that you want to build. A lot of founders, when I start to work with them, they're really defining their goals as that top line revenue or the sales metric that they want to hit. And it doesn't necessarily get them to the destination that they actually want to go. So today I want to talk about how to really clearly define the goals that are going to move your business forward and scale it more effectively. My name is Christy Cox. I am the founder of Veriscale and the creator of the Founder Freedom System. I've spent the last 15 years, actually almost 2 decades of my life, actually helping other founders scale their businesses. And during that time, I even built and scaled 3 of my own. In my first business, I scaled to 6 figures really, really quickly. And I didn't know how to dig out of the place that I had gotten myself into. And the second business, we scaled even more quickly by going over 7 figures in less than a year. And what happened then was that I very quickly burned out, but I also realized that I was chasing the wrong goal because I had the wrong definition of success ultimately. And when I started to really think back to all of the founders I had worked with over the years, at that point, I realized that a lot of them were in that same place. They had burnout or they had built a business that didn't bring them the enjoyment and fulfillment that they thought it would because they were chasing a definition of success that wasn't necessarily accurate to what they wanted to create in their life. And so that's why I developed out the $1 million plus business plan and the founder freedom framework. I want to help other builders like you to really build the business that you want to live in only the work that you love to do. And that might look like a 5, 10, or $20 million company, but that's not how we're going to define success. Now, before we dig in too far on setting goals and defining your outcomes, I want to spend a couple of minutes here just talking about strategy. Look, your overall business strategy has to be dependent upon the mission and vision that you set for your company. And from that, we're going to create specific plans and tactics to ensure that we can live into that overall vision and the strategy that you're building. Your vision really defines your $1 million plus destinations. Those destinations are your overarching vision, your ideal role in the company, your ideal client experience, that thing that's going to set you apart in the marketplace, and the metrics that are really going to define the success, not just for the business. So we're not just talking about sales and revenue here. We're not just talking about gross margin, but also for you as the founder, for specific team members that you bring in. Look, we've all got to eat to live. So you've got to be clear in what that looks like for you. And if you want more than that, we've got to talk about what that looks like so that we can build the roadmap to get there. Your mission, now that is how you're going to get there. It is your roadmap, and it's made up of hundreds of micro decisions that you have to make about how to spend your only 2 real resources. That is time and money. Those are the most valuable things that we can leverage to get you to the place that you want to go. If you don't clearly define and set your goals to drive you towards these very specific destinations and all of them comprehensively, then you could actually create goals that compete with each other instead of compounding to get you the results that you really want. I always like to say that you can't map the journey if you don't know the destination. Think of it like setting out on a road trip from North Carolina to get to California. Like you wouldn't just say, hey, let's go to California, set off tomorrow with no plans. Well, you might, but you still have to know a few key things. You need to know the reason that you're on the trip. Is it for fun? Is it for business? Do you have to get to a wedding? What is that? Why? What's the purpose for this journey? You've got to be able to set the timeline and the budget. Do you need to be there by a specific date? Do you have a certain budget that you have to live within? You're probably going to want to pick out the right vehicle to take the trip, maybe something with a little more legroom. You're going to probably want to define the cities that you stop in along the way. And what's your timeline look like for that? Are you going to have a little time to visit and do some touristy things? Or is it just a one night stop where you're just resting and catching your breath before heading out the next day? In addition, you're probably going to want to talk about who's going to have what role in this trip. If you're not going solo and you're taking a few friends along with you, who's the navigator? Who's the driver? I can tell you right now that I am not the navigator on our Grand RV trip. That is my husband. He is a 20-year veteran and he was a logistics officer in the Marine Corps. We're going to lean into his skill set a little bit more than mine because I get lost driving around the block. All of these things cumulatively are going to help us determine the success of the trip, but ultimately the measurability of our success is if we get there in the time frame that we said and if we're on budget. In your business, I want you to think about these $1 million destinations like your compass. This is where your goals must point, the ultimate destination that you're trying to reach. Your vision, this is why it matters. This is the thing that's driving you forward, is creating your impact in the world. Your role, this is where you should live in the business. It's where your strengths are going to play an integral part in getting you to the next level. You've got to create time to be CEO and visionary of your company. And if there's another specific role, say you're an interior designer, you've got to make use of your skill set and your unique values in this area. Your client experience. Hey, this is the thing that differentiates you and sets you apart in the marketplace. This is how you're going to make your clients feel. It is super important that you set a specific destination for that. And then you've got to start to talk about your metrics. Look, like I said, you've got to eat to live. You've got to measure the progress that you're making in your business. And you've got to define what success is going to look like in this area for both you and your company, because let's face it, as a founder, those go hand in hand. Dr. Benjamin Hardy, in his book, The Science of Scaling, he says that the science of scaling is really all about clarity. It's about knowing your destination, because that is going to change how you act today. So after we set these destinations, how do we then start to really define our goals and build the roadmap that's going to ensure that we get there? We're going to use what I call the $1 million plus roadmap. And it's really made up of 4 P's. That is your people, your processes, your priorities, and your performance. And every goal and outcome that you define, everything that you say you want to achieve within a specific time frame, they should live in one of these 4 categories and have a clear and measurable outcome. So let's talk for a moment about people. You've got to make decisions on whether to hire. You've got to make decisions on what you're going to delegate, and you've got to clearly define roles and success within those roles. The purpose of finding, hiring, and delegating to other people is generally to free someone up from a particular role or tasks that really drain their energy. The measurable outcomes that we're going to look at include the timeline to find that new hire or to delegate key tasks, the budget that you have, the number of hours that are freed up from the person that you're relieving of all those tasks that are draining their energy. And again, maybe that is you. And also the performance standards that we're now defining with very clear and measurable outcomes, such as handling more clients, having a specific gross margin, developing more products, utilization. If I am servicing a client and I have a VA that's helping me on the back end, there should be a utilization rate that we're measuring to make sure that my time is free to manage the relationship. So next, let's talk about your processes. You're going to want to build systems that scale with you in your business and that create an overall better client experience, because again, that is what sets you apart in this crowded marketplace. Each of these should really be focused on either automation, delegation, or personalization. Everything that you're setting up should have one of these key roles assigned to it. And you should have clear and measurable outcomes you tie to each of these goals to measure performance. That can look like a reduction of churn, an increase in retention, an increase in your overall gross margins, or maybe it's gross margins in a particular client segment. It could look like freeing up more time from a certain role within your business or even from you. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about priorities. Look, you have to start to focus on what really moves the needle. You cannot keep practicing spaghetti noodle strategies as you continue to grow your business. So as you start to notice something that works, whether that is content or a certain process or task that you're doing, or if it is a certain method of performance, whatever you do that you notice is really moving the needles on these key outcomes that we're driving towards, you've got to do more of that and less of the other stuff. So when we figure out what works, the goal here is to work smarter, not harder. And in the beginning stage, there's a lot of figuring this out. But when you figure out what works, you double down. You double down on the things that are going to produce the greatest amount of ROI for your time or your money. Again, we're going back to those 2 key resources that you have that are really going to drive your business forward. And you stop doing all the other stuff that doesn't work or is not moving you forward in any way. And finally, performance. I don't think I can reiterate this enough. You've got to track your progress through key metrics. We don't define our goals by metrics alone. We don't just say we want to achieve $5 million in revenue, because the type of revenue we bring in might not be the right kind. So we've got to be crystal clear in what we're creating, but we do need to use those metrics to make sure that we're hitting the goals and targets that we've set. So if we want to serve 700 clients in a particular client segment, a particular niche, and with a particular ICP, I would say, most businesses should probably focus on 700 high ticket clients. That looks different than just saying, I want to hit $5 million in revenue. When we talk about your role, If ideally you want to spend 30% of your time in client work so you can continue to evolve that process and make sure that you have a hand in it, and then 70% of your time in CEO and visionary work, you've got to get crystal clear in that. And then we've got to build the roadmap to ensure that you can get there. And that does include sales, but sales is not the defining metric. As A.G. Lafley says in his book, Playing to Win, strategy is really about making choices. And it is just as much about the things you choose not to do as it is about the things you choose to do. So, how do we start to begin to set the goals that are really going to get us to those key $1 million destinations? Well, first, you define what those are. We need to be crystal clear in the place that we're trying to get to. And then we use those to build out our annual goals each and every year. We're defining the milestones, those key parts of our journey, the cities that we're going to stop in on the way to California to help us get there. From there, we're going to define quarterly goals to help us break down those big annual goals that you have into more tangible performance targets that we can easily hit and see in the future. Then we want to clearly define the target by stating the purpose, the intended outcome that you have, and the metrics that we're going to use to define success. And then you decide what you need to make it happen, to realize those results. So for example, if we say we want to elevate our client experience to a white glove experience so that we can raise our prices with little pushback and decrease churn, that could look like identifying the key parts of the client journey where the experience is not quite white glove or not quite matching up to what we envision in our ideal client experience. Then we'll determine what it would look like to elevate it. What processes or people are needed to really raise it to that level of ideal. And then we'll identify what success would look like here. How can we increase our prices by 20% with limited objections? And how can we reduce our churn by 2% or increase our retention rate by 2%? Next, we're going to cascade parts of this down to your team. We want to bring them in. We want to create buy-in. We want to give them some accountability and help celebrate their own wins. So who's accountable for that phase of the client journey? What people on your team can assist you in getting your processes updated? Or do you need to hire some new people? And what does that look like? What's the time frame for making this happen? What's the budget? Then define what it would look like for them to be successful by completing this specific rock or OKR. Be very clear and make sure it has that element of measurability. This is how your vision gets pushed down to your team and how you're going to start to be able to hold them more accountable to the progress being made. It's also how you get opportunities to celebrate their successes. So you create opportunities on one side to do some coaching and to help them grow. And on the other side, you create opportunities to really celebrate in not just the wins of the business, but their role in that success. One key thing to keep in mind here is that all of your goals, whether it is yours or your team's, they should be performance based. They should not be learning or process based. You're not just going to say, I'm going to learn this new technique. Why are you learning the new technique? What's the purpose and what's the ultimate outcome that it's driving towards? I'm learning this new technique so we can increase our gross margin by 20% because I'll be more effective in this one thing. You've got a specific outcome that you're driving towards. It is performance based. So make sure that you're really crystal clear in what this looks like for both you and your team. Next, I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about a lot of common mistakes that I see founders make when they start on their goal setting journey. The first is setting way too many goals. Look, if everything is important, then nothing truly is. So the most big goals I recommend in any given year is 3. Because you and your team need to be crystal clear in the outcomes that you're trying to create. And you can't do that if you have 17 goals that are supposed to be a priority. The next is confusing activity and effort with actual outcomes and results. Busyness does not equal results, not necessarily. So busyness does not necessarily equal productivity. So don't equate you being busy with you getting to where you want to go. The third mistake I see come up pretty commonly is setting competing goals within your organization. And a lot of times that comes with just not having clarity around what is truly important and what the destinations that you're actually driving towards. So you need to get crystal clear in what it is that you want to create and make sure that you've effectively communicated that to your team. Otherwise, you do risk having too many competing goals that can pull you in different directions. And when that happens, you're not going to get to the destination that you said you wanted to get to. One area I see this come up in most often has to do with sales and sales commissions. A lot of times we give our sales team the objective of growing our top line by 15%. And then internal to the business, we have the objective to increase our gross margin by 5%. And we've not really developed out the specific vision or reason for why we have this. So the sales team is just chasing sales for sales sakes, and they're not necessarily chasing the right kind of sales that could actually produce the results in both areas that we're looking to achieve. So if I've got a product that's selling at 72% gross margin and I've got another product selling at 40% gross margin, but I realize it's easier for me to sell that product with the 40% gross margin and I just go out and sell a bunch of it, I'm actually competing with the goals on the other side of the business where they're trying to increase the overall efficiency and gross margin by 5%. And so this is why it's so important to make sure that you are crystal clear in the destinations that you're trying to get to and that they're not competing with each other. And so this kind of leans into a little bit the next common mistake that I see come up a lot, and that is measuring the wrong metrics. We see this actually more in social media and in content, but that's vanity versus value. So, I really consider that top line metric more of a vanity metric, whereas the gross margin is more of a value metric, like how efficiently you're doing something. But we see it in how it's more easily understood is in social media. A lot of times when we're posting, we equate likes and shares to the possibility of landing a sale or producing a lead, but that's not necessarily true. And in fact, in my own business, I find it's often the opposite of that. It's the posts that don't necessarily get a lot of likes and shares where the lurkers come out as new leads. And then finally, the biggest reason that I see a lot of founders fail is not lack of effort. It is really a lack of clarity, alignment, or measurability. So they don't identify what is actually important and what success looks like in a way that their team can understand. So when you're not clear, your team absolutely cannot be clear. So the very first thing that you have to do is get crystal clear in the outcomes that you're trying to produce. Okay, I know you've heard me mention this word a lot, so I want to take a few minutes to just talk about measurability. Measurability is how you track the success in anything that you're doing. It's how you really determine progress, and it's how you determine what's working and what's not. Your performance goals should really be outputs focused, and that shows up in measurability. And when you start to track again what actually works and what doesn't, then you know where you should double down and you can start to understand the things that you should not be doing. So let's take a look at a couple of the comparisons of goals that have no measurability and those that do, so that you can start to understand the difference. First, I could define something as, do this certain task more efficiently, or I could define the overall task as, hey, I would like you to find a way to do this more efficiently to increase our gross margin by 5%. So now I know what it looks like to be successful in the thing that you've assigned to me. Another example of this could just be, hey, next quarter we want to improve our onboarding. I feel like that shows up a lot for service-based businesses. Instead, if you get specific that you want to reduce the onboarding time from 14 to 7 days while elevating your client experience so that you can reduce churn by 1%, hey, that looks a lot different than the first way that you stated the goal. Remember, I think everybody's crystal clear in the quote by Peter Drucker now that says, what gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed actually improves. When people know that you're measuring the outputs, they're going to focus more heavily on the inputs and discovering what truly works. This again ties back to that principle of we want to work smarter, not harder, and we want to efficiently reach those destinations that we said were super important as we started this process. Dr. Benjamin Hardy, again, he says that you can only scale by focusing on what truly matters. You've got to drown out all that other noise. You've got to stop doing or practicing the spaghetti noodle strategies that show up for so many of us as we're starting our businesses. You've got to only focus on the things that are going to really move the needle forward. That's how you reach your next goal or your next destination. Look, if you found any parts of this video helpful, please hit that subscribe button. I do release new videos every single week based around how to scale your business, how to elevate your client experience. And if you want access to more resources and tools to help you really grow and scale your business effectively, then please join my free school community and you'll get access to tons of tools and resources in there. Look, your $1 million plus business is not that far off in the future. In fact, you could reach it within the next year. You've just got to get crystal clear in what it is that you want to create. You've got to break it down into clear, tangible, and measurable goals. And you've got to bring in your team. If you have a team, bring them in to have you help them get there. Look, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I hope to see you in my school community.